Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clear current.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to take a call in the committee stage on part 2 of this bill, the Commerce Commission International Cooperation and Fees Bill, and as has been repeated by a number of speakers in the House, on this side of the House certainly, that this bill is dated 2008 and it's now 2012, and it does, while it aligns us with Australia, it's taking us quite a long time to actually make that happen. And I think you've got to ask how that will affect other pieces of legislation and other general harmonisation mechanisms which that this government is purportedly undertaking. And one of the main points to make around this, before I get to the issue around the fees exemption, Mr. Chair, is the fact that this was a bill that was a Labor bill, and that it was brought to this. It was brought by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, and it went through the Commerce Committee, Select Committee, some time ago. And it has taken a long time for it to get to this part of the bill in the House, and we're not actually getting to the end part, and goodness only knows when that will happen. The harmonisation with Australia issue is critical, and it's, I suppose, really a measure of our effectiveness as a country, and in a parliamentary sense, that we are pushing legislation through in commerce that's allowing and encouraging that greater reciprocal assistance from the equivalent overseas regulators. And I think in terms of confidence for New Zealand, for other countries dealing with New Zealand, we really do have to be seen to be taking this stuff seriously, Mr. Chair. And my concern, which has been echoed by other members in this House from my own party, but also from others, is that we're not taking these issues seriously enough, and we're certainly not pushing them forward quickly enough. We do expect that there's going to be greater reciprocal assistance between the regulators on this particular issue. But as I pointed out, I think it was in the second reading, Mr. Chair, that that reciprocal relationship is certainly not present on a whole range of other issues that are of great importance at the moment, and that's particularly in the telecommunications industry. And there was an issue of telecommunications law that did come into this piece of legislation that was addressed, because this bill didn't extend to information that was gathered under the Telecommunications Act 2001. And we heard submissions on this issue. It was brought to us as a particular issue by a number of the telcos, which didn't reflect the equivalent legislation that exists in other countries, including in Australia, which is whom we're seeking this harmonisation with. So we had to address, and certainly the officials advised to us, that the possibility of including the telecommunications law was raised by the Commerce Commission with the Minister of Communications and Information Technology at the time, which was then passed on to the Minister of Commerce. And there was an extensive amount of discussion in the Select Committee about this issue, and the regulatory impact statement certainly confirmed that including the Telecommunications Act in the bill outweighed the cost. But since we couldn't do that, it was outside the scope, so there's had to be an SOP introduced into the House on that issue. Mr. Chair, just briefly around the fee exemption issue, which is the subject of Part 2, we in the Select Committee considered that removing the regulation powers to prescribe the class and classes of people who would be exempt from that requirement to pay any fee. So we considered removing that power. But because that provision was targeted to the small and medium-sized enterprises, Mr. Chair.
Sorry? You seeking another call?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll seek another call.
Claire Curran.
Then that provision was targeted to the small and medium-sized enterprises. We decided that it was important to retain it. And so that is, in essence, the essence of Part 2 and why that was considered to be important. I think that it's just important to note that in these important pieces of legislation, which to the rest of the House and perhaps to the people watching on television tonight do seem quite technical in nature, and perhaps for some members may even seem quite tedious, they are very important, and they don't stand alone. And I'm sure the Minister would agree with me on this, that they're not standalone pieces of legislation that exist on their own. They're part of a package, and we've seen come before this House a package of these harmonisation measures, which are about trying to enable business to occur more freely between ourselves and particularly Australia, which requires the regulatory environments of both countries to be more aligned. And in this piece of legislation, that is happening. It's taken a bit of time for us to get there, but I think we're pretty all much in support and agreement around this. But, Mr. Chair, the intent of that is not occurring in, as I pointed out earlier, in some other very significant parts of our economy, in particular around, again, going to the telecommunication industry and the content creation industry, which are areas where there is tremendous growth and impact for us as a nation economically, and where getting the infrastructure right, which includes the regulatory environment, is critical. And so the harmonisation issues there are just as important, and I hope that the Minister sitting in the chair tonight is considering those issues, is thinking about those issues, and we'll actually start to see some results from his deep thinking on these issues starting to appear in the form of potential regulatory change and potentially even legislative change in the future. And because those issues are how we as a nation are going to actually perform better with infrastructure that has a competitive environment and where the regulatory environment is aligned with our cousins across the ditch. So, Mr. Chair, while we certainly support this bill, and speaking on Part 2 on the fees issue, we certainly support this and the other parts of the legislation. We certainly see the much bigger picture, and I'm expressing concern in the House today that the other side of the House, the government, actually doesn't see that bigger picture.
The question is that Part 2 stand part. Those for that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 1 and 2 stand part. Are you going to take a call?
You take the title, is it?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.